Hello and welcome to ThePrint. With me today we have Mr. S.K. Pillai, who has been a former training captain and a former airline pilot with both Air India and Indigo. Shockwaves were sent across the world and India as a London-bound Air India flight from Ahmedabad crashed today noon. Mr. Pillai has joined us today to discuss the safety protocols, what happens in a Mayday situation, and the speculations surrounding it. Welcome to ThePrint, sir.
Thank you for having me, Jasmine.
We are holding this interview to understand from you what are your initial thoughts, just looking at the visuals and the images that have been flashing across social media and on television, on what might have gone wrong in this.
All right, before I start saying anything about this particular accident, two things. One, my heartfelt condolences to all the loved ones of people who lost their lives in this tragic accident. And another, it will be inappropriate of me to comment on anything specific to this particular crash because it's too premature. So it will be highly speculative. What I can broadly talk to you about is what comes to the mind of a pilot when an accident, this catastrophic accident takes place. The thoughts that come into his mind, what could have gone wrong? I can only talk about general, causes for accidents like this. So, yeah, you can go ahead if you're not asking me anything specific about this aeroplane, which happens to be a Boeing 787, what they call a Dreamliner. I have never flown this, so I won't be able to comment anything on the aeroplane or anything specific to this particular accident. So please go ahead, please.
Yeah. Right, sir. I understand. But if you could tell our viewers about what things what things go wrong in such situations, in terms of when a crash like this happens in other circumstances, what are the things that a pilot deals with in such a situation?
All right. So one thing, it's very tragic. Air crashes happen very rarely. And before I say anything, air travel still remains the safest mode of transportation. And normally, what leads to an aircraft is never one particular reason, except if it's a sabotage, which is highly unlikely in this case. Otherwise, a chain of events normally leads to an air crash. So in this particular case, we can only speculate. So I don't want to do that. But having said that, immediately after takeoff, the aeroplane climbed to around 700 feet from what we hear from the news items. As of now, nothing official. So which means after takeoff, within a minute or 2 minutes, he got into some trouble, and a catastrophic trouble. That's the reason the pilot gave a Mayday call, which is given when he is faced with an extreme situation in which there is doubt about the safety of the aeroplane and its passengers. So something catastrophic happened just after liftoff, and he could only climb to 750 feet or so. And thereafter, the plane started coming down. So broadly, either he lost power on both engines, which is, again, unlikely because these aeroplanes are very robust. There are so many redundancies built into it. Two engines failing at the same time is highly, highly unlikely. Another thing which could have happened was like a bird ingestion, like you might have heard some years ago, an American Airlines aircraft which took off from LaGuardia. He had to ditch in the Hudson. In that case, he lost both his engines because he ingested birds. Now, if that had happened, probably we would have seen some evidence of it on this takeoff with some smoke coming out of the engines. There are some aerodynamic changes which happens when you lose engine one or both. So nothing like that seemed to have happened. And another cause could have been something called a wind shear, which is an adverse weather condition. But in this case, the weather seemed to be clear. And I think you probably have the information, the weather information prevailing at that time in Ahmedabad. It looked more or less clear. On a typical summer day, it's a very hot. So the the aeroplane requires a lot of power to lift off. So conditions which could lead to, as I told you, broadly are the aeroplane losing lift either because of both the engines failing or because of an aerodynamic stall. Stall is when an aeroplane loses its lift, basically. So that could have happened, or in a very rare case, by mistake, after takeoff, instead of selecting the landing gear up, which is a normal protocol, and thereafter there is a schedule to retract your takeoff flaps. By mistake, if somebody had retracted the flaps again, the aeroplane will lose lift and it will come down. So broadly speaking, these are the causes which could lead to a crash like this. Again, all speculative about nothing. I'm talking about this particular crash. What has gone wrong in this crash will be out very soon because the DFDR and the CVR will be retrieved in a day or two. And then, of course, they'll play it out and find out exactly what went wrong.
Right. So you mentioned about aerodynamic stall. What does it mean actually?
Actually, what it means is when the lift capability of the aeroplane deteriorates and it's no longer able to lift the aeroplane off the ground. So that could happen for various reasons, of course, technical reasons. I don't want to get into it, but it could happen that the aeroplane got aerodynamically stalled immediately after liftoff. There are cases which happen, and there are corrective measures also which you can take.
Right.
Yeah, but in this case, we do not know. There could be a change in configuration abruptly after takeoff, which was premature. And because we could see the landing gear was still down, but the flaps seem to be up. Normally at that altitude, the flaps are out. You're still in your takeoff configuration.
So in that altitude, the 650, 700 altitude, the flaps are supposed to be how?
Out. It should be in your takeoff configuration. Whatever flap were required for takeoff, it should be in that configuration at that low altitude.
But the images that we are seeing, is that correct? The images that are running on
the images, it seemed to be that the flaps were retracted. Again, those images which I'm purely talking about from the news channels which were streaming the final moments of that crash. So from that, we could make out that the landing gear was definitely down. And in any case, even if he was planning a crash landing, he would have kept the gear down.
Okay. Otherwise, in normal circumstances, the landing gear is supposed to be closed?
It's supposed to be up immediately after takeoff.
Immediately after takeoff, once you hit a certain altitude, and also the flaps have to be open in a certain manner, which is
the flaps are in the takeoff configuration till he reaches a particular. There is a speed schedule at which he retracts the flaps. There is also an altitude above which he starts his flap retraction, and also a speed schedule for each takeoff. It will be different.
Right.
So it is not possible to retract flaps at this low altitude.
Right, sir. So there's another point that I wanted to discuss with you is that at 1:39 the flight had taken off from Ahmedabad airport. That is, as per the DGCA statement. 140-ish, around 140-ish, the call to ATC was made and the pilot said Mayday. Could you tell our viewers what exactly Mayday means and in what circumstances does a pilot say Mayday? Because right after he said Mayday, when the ATC tried to connect back with the pilots, they lost connection.
Okay. Mayday call is generally given when a pilot is faced with a serious emergency, or in another case when his other crew member is incapacitated. So those are the cases where you give a Mayday call. A Mayday call means he is facing an extremely emergent situation in which he requires a certain kind of assistance, and he normally follows it up with what he intends to do. Following a Mayday call he gives to the ATC, he also gives his intention, what he plans to do. Because the safety of the continuation of the flight is definitely at risk. So what he's trying to communicate to the ATC is that he's in an extreme emergency situation, and followed by that, he would normally have said what he wants to do, return back to land, what kind of assistance he requires. And normally the ATC would be interested in finding out the how many total passengers are on board and stuff like that. But in this particular case, I think he could just give that Mayday call, but he could not elaborate on what his intentions were because he hardly had any time. The most critical situation for an aircraft to be in is when it is close to the ground. He hardly had any altitude, 700 odd feet, and his speed was very less. So those are double whammy, two very critical conditions. So his maneuver margins were very, very, very limited. So he had absolutely very limited time to do whatever he was intending to do in that particular situation. I'm sure he would have tried his level best to, do all possible to even if he was planning a crash landing, to put the aeroplane down safely.
Right, sir. So going back to the first part of our conversation where you mentioned the flap situation. So to a layman, if you can just explain when a flight takes off, like you mentioned, the landing gear is closed and then the flaps open. So once the flaps open, the pilot then soars the aircraft into a higher altitude in a normal circumstance. That's what
Yes.
happens. Yes.
Okay. Now, let me take you back to before takeoff. So, normally, all these checks, configuration, everything is made before he starts his takeoff. And there are various warnings. Suppose I got busy with something, I was too preoccupied, I forgot to configure the aeroplane for takeoff. There will be warnings. It will tell me that you're not configured for takeoff. So, the chances of missing those, even if you forget, the aeroplane will remind you. There are warnings, there are warning bells, there are attention getters, master cautions, chimes going off. So many things will tell you that you are not in takeoff configuration and you can correct that. So he would have got into his takeoff configuration before even he entered the runway for takeoff. So either immediately after takeoff, by mistake, it has happened to my memory, 3 or 4 instances, of course, long past, where by mistake, the pilot not flying or the pilot monitoring, or as laymen think, the co-pilot, instead of selecting the gear up after liftoff, after takeoff, they have by mistake taken the flaps up. These have happened. And I think in one particular case years ago, somewhere in, I'm not sure the type of aircraft, but it led to a crash. So where the pilot monitoring by mistake selected the flaps up before it was due. So you eventually select the flaps up, but that happens at a certain altitude and according to a certain speed schedule. Before that, you are not supposed to select the flaps after takeoff.
Right, sir. So like you mentioned that there are safety protocols before takeoff. If you can just tell us what, as a pilot who undergoes training, what sort of protocols are in place that are, and like what sort of checks and balances that are.
Every stage of the flight, once you get into the aeroplane, even before you get into the aeroplane, from the flight dispatch side, safety, you are told what is the aircraft. If there is any minor snag, it is brought to the notice of the pilot, and he's shown that if there are minor snags with which you can fly the aeroplane, it doesn't affect your safety. So the regulators allow you to fly the aeroplane till it reaches a major base where repairs can be carried out. So right from when the pilots report for the flight in the flight dispatch for their briefing, they are safety conscious. Anything that is not correct in the aeroplane, they are told. If there is anything under what they call a minimum equipment list, if there are certain snags which can be carried forward, the pilot is told about it. And if there are any changes to his normal takeoff or takeoff speeds or configuration that has to be made, he's told at that stage itself. Then when you enter the aeroplane, anything you do, you follow a checklist. And there are standard operating procedures which are more like safe operating procedures. So every airline, they devise their standard operating procedures. So for each stage of flight, there are checklists, there are standard operating procedures to be followed. So that even if your memory tells you, there are times, when you want to, because you've flown the aeroplane for so many years and so many hours, you try to do certain things by memory. But The checklist will tell you if you have omitted anything. So those checklists are followed. And safety at no stage is compromised that way.
Right, sir. So, how many engines does an aircraft usually have, and on how many engines, suppose one engine falters or there is a technical glitch while during takeoff or while the pilot is in air, on how many engines can a passenger aircraft function?
Okay, most aeroplanes now fly on two engines because the reliability of engines have improved so much that the chances of even one engine failing is so rare. So that is why now most airlines fly, they have two engine. Most airliners are two engine aeroplanes. So this particular one, Boeing 787 800 series, has got two engines, and both engines are kept running in an extreme, highly improbable case where an engine fails for various reasons. It could be like a bird hit, it could be a mechanical failure. So many reasons. If an engine fails, it is an urgent situation, not an emergency like a Mayday, what this captain had given. He was in a more grave situation than a single engine failure. If one engine fails, it's a different call, what they call pan. It's a single engine failure. Most pilots in their long career of 30, 40 years, 20, 30,000 hours of flying, they'll undergo one engine failure at some time, some stage in their careers. So the most critical stage to have an engine failure is at takeoff. As I told you, no altitude, no speed. Most difficult to control an aeroplane is when you're close to the ground and when you're low on speed. So if you have an engine failure, okay, it's an urgent situation. You're not supposed to continue the flight. One engine can take you can take off safely, come back and land. In this particular case, because it is carrying about 50, 60 tons of fuel because he was flying non-stop from Ahmedabad to London. So he would have had to go to a certain designated spot, dump his fuel, reduce his weight, and come back and land. So you have that much of time, even when an engine fails, although you will not continue to London, you'll come back and land. But after doing a thorough check, after dumping fuel and doing so many other checks, you'll come back and land.
And this was something that had happened within a couple of minutes, right? Like within 2 minutes.
Within a minute after takeoff, he got into a very, very serious situation, which warranted a Mayday call. Now, what that situation he encountered will be out once the DFTR and the CVR are read out. And I think in the next 72 hours, they'll get some kind of a clarity on what went wrong in this particular case.
There are also some speculations that this could have happened because of bird infestation or bird eating situation.
Yes.
Elaborate on that.
Yes, because Ahmedabad and many other fields in India, bird menace is one thing. It's a general on notices to airmen. They generally print bird activity in and around airports. So we are supposed to look out for birds if we can avoid at takeoff. If you ask me at 30 feet to try and avoid the bird, I'll probably the aeroplane will crash. You can't do much about it. So birds, yes, like I told you in that case in American Airlines, he got birds into both his engines, which is very, very rare. But in this particular case, I'm not sure, because normally when you get birds into your engine, you'll find some kind of smoke, some flames coming out of the the exhaust of the engines, and it makes an aerodynamic effect on the aeroplane. Aeroplane might yaw this way or that way. So here nothing seemed to have happened. Again, it's all speculative, so I do not want to hazard a guess. But yes, birds. I've had a bird hit takeoff from Delhi some years ago. So immediately after liftoff, I had a bird hit. We had to shut the engine down, although the engine did not fail on us, but we had to shut the engine down because it would have failed sooner or later and would have costed the airline a lot of money. So we had to be on the safe side. We shut that engine down and we came back and landed. So bird hit is a reality. Many pilots have had bird hits. So, yeah.
Also, I wanted to understand from you, could electrical wiring or some sort of electrical glitch could have led to such a short notice crash? Because in usual situations, we see that pilots try their best, to, take the flight away from, some place into some place that is not residential, or to, do a controlled landing. Here, the pilot didn't quite get any time. He didn't get.
He did not. He Not certainly he did not have the time, because as you could make out, I mean, if the news reports are to be believed, he reached only about 700 feet before the aeroplane started.
Absolutely. Yes, yes.
So he had very, very little maneuver margins. I mean, he could maybe do a 10 degrees, 15 degrees kind of a bank, get onto, some part which was not populated, or I'm not very sure from takeoff on the southwesterly runway how populated it was. But I retired more than 2 years ago, so things have changed quite a bit. But hardly any margins. Captain Sullenberg was lucky; he had the Hudson River, and he hit the birds at quite a high altitude, and the engine started stuttering and failing. Over a period of 2-3 minutes. So in this case, something catastrophic happened that did not give him any time to do any of those things.
So we've discussed safety protocols in terms of what a pilot has to, see.
Yes, yeah.
It's a particular flight. Now, if you could tell us about the larger scenario in terms of safety, what are the checks and balances that the Indian aviation sector has to undergo? Because this particular flight that we're talking about, from open source, it was seen that this flight had also flown from Delhi to Ahmedabad early hours today, and then it was supposed to take off from Ahmedabad to London. So it had completed one flight for today itself. So in between that timeline, what are the checks that engineers and others have to do? And also, if you could explain the larger safety and security scenario in the aviation sector right now in India.
Okay, now after completing one sector, there is something called a transit check, which the engineer, the technicians, they walk around the aeroplane, see if there are certain times when you hit a bird, the pilot doesn't know till he has parked the aeroplane, because not all birds you get into the engine. Some birds hit your tailplane, some birds hit the wing, some small birds. So the engineer does a thorough check if there are any damages, external damages to the aeroplane. Then he checks. Normally, that will be an engineer's call. It is not in my domain, but he has to carry out certain checks which are written, documented, and it is required to be carried out, recommended by the manufacturer and your local regulator and the airline. So after every flight, certain checks have to be carried out. Even though the engineer and the technicians are doing their job, one of the pilots still will go and do a pre-flight check himself, walk around. Thereafter, he comes into the cockpit and does all the rest of the checks. And if you ask me, the regulator, yes, they are also audited from time to time. The Federal Aviation Administration. Otherwise, your regulator also has to maintain, because they are, of course, responsible for maintaining safety standards within the country, within the airlines, but they are also answerable. So they are also liable to be audited. And I do not know the frequency, but every 2-3 years, even they are audited. So unless we maintain a certain standard of safety, regulator and the airlines, we will not be allowed to fly into, say, Europe, America, because there the standards are very strict. So to that extent, we are maintaining all the required standards. And then individual airlines have their own safety culture. So that varies, as they say, 19-20 ka farak from airline to airline.
Right.
So some airlines invest a lot on trainings and safety and stuff like that. So, but everybody has to maintain the minimum required standards. Everybody has to maintain.
And these are all noted down. If there was some problem with it, it has to be listed out in a particular document.
Airlines are penalized if they are caught, if they are during the routine audits, if there is something wrong, either with air crew procedures, or they find anything wrong, they are liable to be penalized. And pilots are grounded if they make any safety violations.
So now, sir, how will the inspection? How does an inspection in situations like crash go on? How is the problem diagnosed?
Okay, I have never been an air crash investigator. Neither have I undergone it. Of course, there'll be. I hope the area around the crash has been sanitized, and it's So the air crash investigation is kind of a special field. and there are investigators. Now, what will happen is not only the regulator, the Aircraft Investigation Board of India, that is the Civil Aviation Ministry, also the airline safety, the manufacturer, that is Boeing company, will they send their experts, and probably even from Europe, because this aeroplane was basically going to London. Right. So even the CAA, the British regulator, might also be involved. So they'll of course be looking at the wreckage, and then all the details of what went wrong, even in the previous sector from Delhi to Ahmedabad, everything is recorded in that what they call a black box, but it's actually a bright orange colored box. It contains the digital flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. So whatever conversation happened in the cockpit, on ground, in air, for the last 2-3, it used to be, I think, 2 hours of cockpit recording, voice recording. Any master caution which came up, any talk between the two pilots, between the pilot and the engineer on ground, between the cabin crew when she came for the briefing, everything is recorded. So that will be played out, and the DFDR. DFDR will show you exactly at what was the weather condition, what was the airplane weight, what was the configuration required, what was the configuration selected, at what altitude, what was done. Everything will be clear. I think because it's not in a highly inaccessible area, the crash happened close to the airport, they'll be able to retrieve within 24 hours the DFDR and the voice recorder, and I think in probably 72 hours you'll probably get a fair picture of what went wrong.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Thank you so much for joining in with The Print today, sir.
Thank you for having me.